Hello, everyone, and welcome into another Bracketology here on the Sports Daily Media Network YouTube channel. Today, Sunday, February 22nd. We're getting closer, exactly 3 weeks from the day we will have the bracket. Wanted to be able to do this earlier today, but the Team USA gets the gold medal in hockey. I was watching that, so I started my projection after that. And here is what I came up with. We have a couple of changes in the automatic bids column. We have a change at the top of the America East. UMBC is taking the lead there over NJIT and Vermont. We have Utah Tech is that first team in the 15 seed line there. Sorry, that is blocked. Let me slide this over a bit. So Wright State moves up to the 14, and then UC Irvine is taking the lead out in the Big West. All the 12 seeds are the same. So, not a whole lot to talk about there. Pretty easy to decipher the difference between these teams, and ultimately, it's really up to them whether they win the conference tournament or not. I don't think any of them will be able to get in as an at-large. Now, there's some other teams that might, but let's start off with the number one seeds. Yesterday, the bracket reveal by the committee, the first three were obvious. It was Michigan, Duke, and Arizona. And then the fourth one seed was a big conversation. The committee went with Iowa State over the likes of UConn, Houston, Illinois. I probably would have had Houston there, but Iowa State won the head-to-head. But a lot of these teams were in action yesterday, too, so we got some new data. We had Arizona go on the road to Houston and beat them. We had UConn go on the road to Villanova and beat them. We had Iowa State go on the road to BYU and lose, and Houston, like I said already, lost at home to Arizona. So I did make a change in that fourth one seed, and I put UConn back there. So after months of having these four teams there, you have a UConn team that loses to Creighton, and then you have, a really nice win by Iowa State. But I think a quad one road win is enough for UConn to get back up there. It's very clear that the committee still values UConn's non-conference a lot, only dropping them to 5 overall after the Creighton loss at home. They obviously picked up some really big wins, so I think that they are the fourth number one seed at this point. In terms of the other 3 1 seeds, I think there was a little bit of a shuffle. Obviously, 2 of them played each other. Duke took down Michigan in Washington, D.C. Very clearly, Duke is now the number 1 overall seed. And I actually pushed Michigan all the way back to 3. Arizona picked up that road win at Houston, like I said, and now both teams have 2 losses, and you can start to compare across the quads. I do think that that Houston win might be able to take them up to number 2. And then in terms of Michigan, obviously there's still a humongous gap after Michigan to UConn. So I didn't really expect to push UConn all the way back or Michigan all the way back to 3, but it's what I ended up doing. All right, now for the 2 seeds, we're keeping them the same as the top 8. We had Houston, the Arizona game, like I said, Iowa State losing at BYU, Purdue beating Indiana on Friday by a significant margin, sort of bouncing back from a previous loss to the Hoosiers earlier in the year, and then the loss to Michigan at home. And then Illinois goes on the road to the LA road trip in the Big Ten. Nobody has been able to sweep that yet, and that stayed true as UCLA knocked off Illinois last night. Donovan Dent, buzzer beater. You can see the final play on the Instagram account. But I thought there was a little bit of an opening here for Illinois to jump up a few spots, but they were unable to get the job done. So the order that I have here of the teams is Iowa State, Houston, Purdue, Illinois. So I have swapped Purdue. Actually, no, sorry. Illinois 7th, Purdue 8th. Illinois still has the head-to-head win at Mackey Arena. So those are my 5th through 8th. Now we go down to the 3 line. And I actually did make a change here. We had the bracket reveal. They sort of pushed off the JT Toppin conversation for Texas Tech by putting them on the 4 line. Texas Tech was able to beat Kansas State yesterday, but I actually had Gonzaga slipping up and taking that last number 3 seed alongside Florida and Nebraska, who each moved up a spot, in my opinion, because Kansas lost a home game to Cincinnati, which I'd have to be sure exactly where that stands in the quads, but Cincinnati's not a tournament team. Loss at home to a non-tournament team not going to help. And then in terms of Nebraska and Florida, they picked up victories as well. All right, now to the 4 seeds. There's Texas Tech, like I mentioned. They're my top number 4 seed. I have Michigan State, who is in action right now against Ohio State. That obviously would change things if the Buckeyes are able to finish from their halftime lead here. And then Virginia and Tennessee. Tennessee was a team that was not mentioned during the reveal as a team on the 4 line or even in consideration. But they picked up a huge road win against Vanderbilt yesterday. And then in other spots for this last spot, I thought it was between Vanderbilt, Alabama, and Tennessee beat them both on the road. Now, I think head-to-head is something that can be a little bit overrated, especially when we get to the end of the season here and there's 30-plus games to pick from. But a road head-to-head win, I think, holds a little more weight than if you win at home by 4. That doesn't necessarily mean you're the better team, but road wins definitely mean a lot. And Tennessee also has a neutral court win against Houston. They also have an away win against Georgia. So they have 4 wins against the field away from home, which I think will push them up into the protected seeds. And then in terms of Virginia, they still have 4 Quad 1A wins. That's why they're out, kicking their coverage a little bit when it comes to the AP poll, the numbers. Maybe not suggesting that Virginia's in the top 16, but their wins certainly bring them up there. All right, in terms of the 5 seeds, a few teams that I mentioned there. This SEC trio of teams, Arkansas, Vanderbilt, Alabama, they're all going to have played each other by the end of the year, so it should still sort itself out. But in terms of my 5 seed rankings, I go Vanderbilt, Alabama, Arkansas, St. John's. Vanderbilt already went on the road and beat Alabama. I'm going to have to check in the head-to-head with Vanderbilt. With the Commodores, they have they lost on the road to Arkansas. And what did they do with Alabama? They beat Alabama at home. So, we'd have to see exactly there how that shakes out. They do not play either one of those teams again this year, except for Tennessee, who they play on the road. Obviously, that would even things up if the away teams are able to win those games. But, so with this SEC mess here at the 4, 5, and then potentially even 6 seed, head-to-head's probably going to be really important. But in terms of that, if they haven't really separated themselves, then it will be the determining factor. All right, the 6 seeds now. We did have a little bit of a change here in terms of BYU beating Iowa State last night. I had brought them all the way up from the second 7 seed to my first 6 seed. I think, the Richie Saunders situation there, if they're able to continue to win games without him, that is going to be they're not really going to be punished for not having him. And on top of that, this is their first Quad 1A victory of the season. So a potential weakness on the, team sheet. A little bit less of a weakness now that you're able to knock off Iowa State. And then in terms of the next 2 teams, Louisville and North Carolina, they will meet tomorrow at 7 o'clock. UNC was able to bounce back from that tough loss to NC State with a big victory against Syracuse. Henry Vasar has come back. I think UNC should be okay as they try and just sort of tread water here before Caleb Wilson returns. That's going to be something to watch out for. And then Wisconsin, I brought up to my final number 6. This was a little bit of a interesting spot because a lot of these teams, now we're getting into the category of teams that lost this weekend. So, we had St. Louis lose to Rhode Island this week. We had Villanova just lose to UConn. So I actually brought up Wisconsin here. They still have the two best road wins in the sport, and it's very very narrow once we get into this area. I think after the five seeds, I think there's a big drop off, and BYU obviously could win some big games to push up into that. But the ACC teams, if you're not going to beat Duke, then you're probably not going to move the needle a lot. And of course, UNC has already done that, so there's only one more opportunity to do that the rest of the way. All right, my seven seeds now: Villanova, Utah State, NC State, and St. Louis. The order there is SLU, Nova, NC State, Utah State. I think not a whole lot to get into here. The Aggies are clearly, above that, the rest of the tier there in the Mountain West. We've got Villanova, who is pretty clearly the third best team in the Big East, and they've got pretty good numbers to back that up. And then in terms of NC State, a really solid week for them. Obviously they get that huge victory against North Carolina, and then the way that the schedule broke, they actually didn't play this weekend, so they haven't had another data point there to bring them down. Now for the 8 seeds, we've got Kentucky, SMU, Clemson, and Iowa. The Hawkeyes got their victory against Nebraska earlier this week. SMU beat Boston College. And then in terms of Kentucky, they have now lost 3 straight after winning a bunch in a row. Kentucky's an interesting situation because there's a little bit of a different standard there than at some other places. And, this is not going well. They have the most expensive team in the sport. They should be better than this, but they have now lost 3 in a row, including on the road at Auburn on a last-second tip-in last night. So I don't think they're really on the bubble yet, but if the losses start to stack up, then maybe that's a conversation that we're going to have. But in terms of Kentucky right now, I think an 8 seed is pretty fair. They have a number of good wins to push them ahead of the bubble, but they have a lot of losses. And they lost to Georgia at home this week before losing to Auburn on the road. Like, those teams are right there around you, and you lose to them, you're going to go down the seed list. So in terms of Kentucky, I think potentially a very, very interesting situation that we might have developing. All right, now for the 9 seeds, we've got Miami, Texas A&M, Texas, and Georgia. Very difficult to figure out the SEC around here in terms of bracketing. Obviously SEC teams can't play in the first round. They can only play in the round of 32 if they've played once this year, and that they really, really try and avoid that. So Miami, getting a little bit of a little bit of a rhythm here in the ACC. They pick up another a tough loss at Virginia yesterday, but before then, they beat Virginia Tech. They beat NC State on the road. They beat North Carolina. So they have definitely pushed up off the bubble a little bit. They needed those big wins against tournament teams. They got 2 of them. They beat another team in Virginia Tech that's not far off the bubble. And then they really, really turned a close game against Virginia. So in terms of Miami, I think they're in a pretty good spot right now. In terms of the SEC teams here, A&M, Texas, and Georgia, they're probably going to make it just because they've beaten up on each other enough. Like, Georgia and Texas played yesterday, and, that game went to Georgia, I believe. Yeah, so Georgia wins 91-80. They win at Rupp Arena, so they were potentially slipping a little bit towards the bubble this week. They get that boost up there. Texas is now 17-10. They had that great run where they beat a bunch of good teams, a bunch of bad teams too. But now at 17-10, they play Florida. They go on the road to College Station. They go on the road to Arkansas. So we could be looking at a Texas record situation again here if they're not able to grab a couple of these games. And in terms of the Aggies, I think the Aggies are in a really weird spot because they've won a lot of basketball games, 19-8. They're in a better spot record-wise than a couple of these, other teams, but they had a very easy schedule at the beginning of the SEC. The games have started to get tougher, and they haven't really won any of them. They lost to Bama. They lost to Florida by a bunch. They lost to Missouri at home. They lose to Vanderbilt on the road. Like, they go on the road to Fayetteville to play Arkansas this week. That's important. They host Texas. They host Kentucky. Like, we're going to see a lot of movement between these SEC teams in this 8 to 9 range. Then in terms of the 10 seeds, we have got St. Mary's, UCF, UCLA, and Indiana. For St. Mary's, they gained a quad 1 win by doing nothing. They still need a win over the field to feel really safe, but they've got Santa Clara at home and Gonzaga on the road to finish the regular season. They're going to probably have to win one of those to feel really comfortable about things. And if they don't, they'd lose. They get to 6 losses, and then, of course, they'd pick up another one in the West Coast Conference tournament to not, obviously, if they win it, they're in. But that would be 7 losses for St. Mary's. So I think that is the number that they're going to have to avoid. If they can stay at 5 or 6 losses, I think they'll be in the NCAA tournament. It's a big one, Wednesday night at 11 p.m. Eastern on the CBS Sports Network. Santa Clara, spoiler alert, might be on the line below. In terms of UCF, they're slipping a little bit. They did beat Utah on the road. They're 19-7. They have a good record. They beat TCU this week to potentially push TCU off the bubble a little bit, but they lost at home to West Virginia. They just lost to Cincinnati. They lost to Houston by a bunch. The predictives are really not on their side, and it's something that is really, they're 46th in the net. They are the second worst team that I've selected into the field in the net. But their resume is very solid, top 30 there, but the predictives are down at 51. So in terms of selection, I think probably they're a little bit safer than some of these other teams around them, because after all, who you beat is supposed to matter in terms of being selected into the field, and then it's supposed to be 2 different processes, selecting teams and then going ahead and seeding them. So they might have been voted into the field pretty early, but because their predictives are outside the top 50, they could get dragged down there towards the bubble. In terms of their quad situation, they do have that top quad 1A win. They have 3 other quad 1 wins, but they do have 2 losses outside of the top quad, and they're just 12-7 in meaningful games. So in terms of being selected, like I said, I think they're fine, but unless they're able to fix the predictives a little bit, they're probably going to be pretty close to the bubble. All right, in terms of Indiana, the last team on my 10 line, in terms of the rankings, I actually have Indiana above UCLA. Obviously, Indiana went on the road and won there. Among other things, they both have a Purdue win at home, and now UCLA has the Illinois win at home as well. Indiana is 5 spots better in the net resume rankings, essentially the same, and then Indiana is 6 spots better in the predictives, and UCLA has 2 losses outside of quad 1 and 2. Quad 1. Indiana has 0. So, it's very close, and the head-to-head might be the difference here, because Indiana is on the verge of getting another quad 1 win via Wisconsin. Wisconsin is 34th in the net. If they get to top 30, that will be another quad 1 win. So, a numbers game, obviously, as it always is at this point in the year. You want the teams that you beat to play better so that win looks better. But in terms of after these teams here, after UCLA, I think, we can start talking about teams that maybe might get left out at this point. Obviously, things could change. But on the 11 line here, we have Auburn, Miami, Ohio, and then our last 4 in. So I actually have Miami, Ohio over Auburn in terms of the seed list. Obviously, Miami is undefeated on the season. Their resume is up by in the 30s. I think if they can get to the MAC tournament undefeated, I think they will be in either way. They've played just 1 quad 2 game. They've won it 9 quad 3 games. Obviously, it's a very interesting situation with the Red Hawks because they have not played anybody in the top 100 and just one team they have played nobody on the top 100 on the road. One team in the top 100, that was Akron. They beat them by 4. Akron will be favored in the rematch if they play for the MAC championship. But yeah, I think one loss and they're in. I think it would set a bad precedent for the mid majors if this Miami team is left out. In terms of Auburn, they picked up a huge 1 point victory against Kentucky yesterday to get back to that 3 games over 500 mark that we always talk about. They're 32nd in the net. Their resume suggests they're at high 30s. The predictives are pretty solid too, but in terms of wins and losses, they just don't have enough wins for me to be certain that they'd be in. They are just 7-12 in the top two quads and 9-12 in meaningful games. They do have top two quad 1A wins, three quad 1B, but they're just 2-2 in quad 2, which is okay if you've had a bunch of tough games. Yeah, but you're 500 ball in Q2. I think that's what's dragging them down here a little bit towards the bubble. Now, they do have some games against some non-tournament teams coming up. So if they can win those, get away from that 500 record mark, I think they'll be in. Because after all, they do have the number one strength of schedule on the season. So I think if they can stay 3 games over or better, I think they'll be in. But it's a big conversation here. Auburn and Miami, you've got the two, polar opposites in terms of resume. Number one strength of schedule for Miami, like 350th in strength of schedule. Miami's won every single game. Auburn is 15-12. In terms of the resume rankings, Miami's about 3 spots higher than Auburn, but in the predictives, Auburn is 48 spots higher than Miami. So, just this would be such a cool first 4 game if they got to play each other. Auburn would probably win. In fact, they'd be favored by 15 probably, but look, I think that's where those two teams are at. Miami is qualifying as our automatic qualifier from the MAC right now because they lead that division. So they can't be in the first 4 in this exercise, even if they are. I have them ranked above those 4 teams, but even if they were interspersed in those 4 teams, they would not be in Dayton because they're the automatic bid right now. All right, last 4 in, you can see on the screen in order from 4th to last in. Here it is. It's Santa Clara, Missouri, Ohio State, and New Mexico. Missouri and New Mexico have come into our field. Santa Clara and Ohio State have held serve here. Ohio State gets that win against Wisconsin. They now have 2 wins against the field. Both of them are Q2. And one of them's against UCLA at home, though. So I'm not super inclined to make a home head-to-head win the tiebreaker. They're in action right now against Michigan State, and they're losing by 3. I don't know if a loss here knocks them out of the field because the Spartans are obviously really good on their home floor, but that is something to look out for Ohio State. Now for Santa Clara, they've got pretty solid numbers across the board, 43rd in the resume, 37 in the predictives. They do have one quad 1B win, and they do have that quad 4 loss to Loyola. So that is something that's obviously dragging them down significantly because 8-5 in meaningful games, 8-5 in the top 2 quads. 15-5 in 17-5 in meaningful games. Obviously, is a great record, but that quad 4 loss is not great, and they already beat St. Mary's once. Can they do it again? And I wouldn't say book their bid in the tournament, but it would be significantly on their side. So Santa Clara is my 4th to last team in. Ohio State, my 2nd to last team in. Now, Missouri is my 3rd to last team in. They were out of my field last time, but a 1-1 week, which included a win over Vanderbilt and a loss to Arkansas. Look, that's a good 1-1. They get, another high-quality win. They have a few already. This is their 3rd in the top part of Quad 1. But they're 1-1. They're 4-4 in Quad 2, which is not great, honestly. And then just 2-0 in Quad 3, so they are 10-9 in meaningful games in the top 3 quads. So for Missouri, it's going to be really, really, every single game matters. Every game is going to be, very nerve-wracking, and they're just going to have to probably get enough good wins to overcome some of their bad numbers, like 60th in the net, 43rd across the resume, 47th in predictives. So nothing really sticks out there as bring me in, except for the fact that they have those three big wins. Now, that seemed to be a big talking point yesterday on the Bracket Reveal show, that the big wins might be important. Now, the committee hasn't always brought their precedents down the bracket further. At the top, it might be away wins. In the middle, it might just be wins. At the bubble, it might be can you avoid bad losses? But that seemed to be an emphasis up at the top, so I'm going to assume that they're going to have that the rest of the way through, which is why Missouri has to be in. They have to be. And then in terms of my last team in, I brought the Lobos of New Mexico into the field. I think that they are. This might be more so of like a change of opinion from my end rather than them doing anything. They're 43rd in the net, 45th across resume, 46th across predictives. They have 2 quad 1 victories, but they do have a loss in Q2 and Q3. I just think that they're 12-6 in meaningful games. They have 2 quad 1 wins. They have wins around them in terms of the teams. They beat Santa Clara at home, and they beat VCU on the road, who might be coming up later. They did lose to San Diego State on the road by 3, which obviously you can say meaning, close. San Diego State's close to them, but they do have a rematch at the pit. If New Mexico can win that, I would like their chances to be included. I think that they have a pretty solid resume here. And I think with New Mexico that I did change my tune a little bit on them. I do think that their wins are going to have a little bit more weight than I previously thought. I'm going to bring up their page here in just a second. Yeah, so here it is. They're 21-6, 12-4. And then in terms of the quads, they played Nebraska. They do have that Q3 loss, a rivalry game on the road. They beat VCU away, home to Santa Clara, like I said. And then in terms of the Mountain West games, they've done fairly well. They picked up a quad 1 road win here against Grand Canyon. They picked up a quad 2 road win against Fresno. But now they've got 3 of their last 4 really tough games. At Nevada as a quad 1, home to San Diego State, that rematch that I was talking about. And then they go on the road to Utah State to finish the season. So I think they're in a good spot right now to be selected. Obviously, they've got to win probably 3 of their last 4. In terms of why I brought them in, they've got 1.3 WAB here, which is wins against bubble. That's a pretty important stat that they mentioned again in the preview show. And then last year, it was sort of the determining factor from a couple of teams getting in or not. So you see New Mexico with 1.3 WAB here. The reason why I have them over San Diego State despite the head-to-head is this. San Diego State minus 0.2 WAB at 18-8. Now, New Mexico has 3 quad 1 games in a row here. Or San Diego State, rather, has 3 quad 1 road, 2 of them on the road, games in a row here. And they can really do some damage if they can win a couple of those. So I don't think I don't think it's done yet on San Diego State. They do come in my first 4 out. It's USC, who's my first team out, TCU, San Diego State, and VCU. The Trojans lost a big home game to Oregon yesterday. Chad Baker-Mazara did come back for the Trojans, and they still lost at home to one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. That is their second loss at home to a Q3 opponent in the league. So I think that's why I brought USC out. You had Chad Baker-Mazara for both of those games. And so that excuse, I don't know if that really tracks as much as, we initially thought it would. In terms of TCU, they've, like I said before, they have hit for the cycle. In terms of wins, they have 4 quad 1 wins, 2 quad 1A, but they have both won and lost a game in each quad. Quad 4 loss to New Orleans, quad 3 loss, quad 2 loss, and obviously a bunch of quad 1 losses. So, they're not even in the top 50 in resume metrics. And, I think TCU is out right now. I do. I think you've got to make these games count um, early in the season, and TCU dropped a big one there. They're down to 17-10. Their WAB is .2, so it's just over positive. They were able to beat West Virginia at home to get out of the negatives there, but they do have the home win against Iowa State. But other than that, they're going all the way back to the non-conference to get wins against the field. They do have three: Florida, Wisconsin, and Iowa State. Obviously, three great wins against the field. But in terms of your losses, you have a loss at home to New Orleans, quad 4, loss at home to Notre Dame, quad 3, loss at Utah, out of the tournament, loss at Colorado, out of the tournament. You have 4 losses to teams not in the tournament. So I think that is something that could bite TCU if it comes down to it. We already talked about San Diego State. And then VCU. They were in my field last time, if you may remember. I did have them in, but they lost at St. Louis. They had the lead early, and then it sort of all fell apart super quickly, and there was a pretty nasty brawl at the end of that one. I just think that, this is a team that needed that St. Louis win, and they're probably going to need the automatic bid now. I do see a question in the chat about VCU. They're going to need to win the A10 now. They squandered both their opportunities against St. Louis. They lost to Santa Clara in the non-conference. They are going to have to win the they're going to have to win the Atlantic 10 tournament, which in the past has been a Sunday game. I don't know if that's changed. If it is, a St. Louis VCU round 3 could be pretty interesting there in terms of just about every team on the bubble. The lowest seed to ever win the tournament, that was Villanova as an 8 seed in 1985, I believe, and then UConn as a 7 seed won in 2014, the second of their 2 and 3 or 4 years there when Kevin Ollie was the coach and Jeremy Lamb was still there. And that's when they played 8 seed Kentucky in the championship game. So 7 seed UConn recently, 8 seed Villanova back in 1985. So this is our most recent projection. I've been talking for a while, so I think I'm going to wrap it up. Obviously, we'll be back next weekend for another one. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.